from Day on the Hill. So there have been some ideas and opportunities that have been floated over the last couple of months, and we were all trying to get through GVSA and through the conference before we really locked in and had some of those conversations. But want to just see if we can talk through some of those today, figure out where we're at, what action items might need to happen to just kind of build and improve upon Day on the Hill and strengthen it a little bit more for this year. So the three big items that I think are probably the primary focus of conversation, one being the topic matter, so what really are the asks or the information being shared. Two being the physical materials, and if there's a way to scale those back a little bit, make them a little bit more digestible. And then three, of course, which I don't think we've done, at least since I've been on, is some sort of an opportunity to do a virtual, whether it just be a video or whether it be a live training or something before Day on the Hill, just to give commissioners a better sense of what to expect and to kind of go over some materials. And that's why I'm glad Candace is on the call. So thanks, Candace, for being on. So, and we are recording, is that right, Hope or Jim?
Yes.
Whoever's called. Okay, perfect.
Yes, and Terry just joined.
Perfect.
Terry just
Welcome,
joined.
Terry. Welcome, Terry. Okay, well, let's start with the asks, because that's probably the most important thing. The three ideas that have been floated in terms of kind of the primary, obviously going into Day on the Hill, we want to talk about what Volunteer Tennessee is, right? We will do that. That's a part of any conversation, what Volunteer Tennessee is, and just building that kind of positive reputation for the organization with elected officials. But we had a conversation, last year was my first time doing Volunteer Tennessee Day on the Hill. I've done some Days on the Hills with some other organizations, and really was wanting to challenge us a little bit to think through, in addition to just broadly, here's who we are, please keep us in your, keep us on your radar, is really specifically sharing some key points, some key successes, and maybe some key asks. So the three that have been floated, and I think we could do all three of these because none of them are heavy necessarily and they interlock, but one is to very more intentionally promote the Tennessee Serves Network. This year it's gotten a lot of attention over the last year, specifically as it relates to the disaster. So I think there's an opportunity to highlight it and talk about it in a way we haven't before. Two was the specifically the roles and the ways in which Volunteer Tennessee and the commission and the staff have supported disaster relief efforts over the past year in a number of different capacities. So I know Jim was vital in helping to get some AmeriCorps and CCC folks on the boots on the ground in the region. I know that the platform is used pretty significantly throughout the disaster to rally volunteers. I know there's been some other opportunities that have come from that. So I think an opportunity to specifically talk about how valuable the organization was as it relates to the disaster. And then the third item, which I think is the small ask, is just putting it on their radar that we will be doing a road show this summer and that we'll share dates and things as they get closer. But really inviting and encouraging them that if they're available and able, if we're in their community, that we would love to engage with them while they're there. So even outside of Day on the Hill, we would love to invite them to be a part of that, to engage with them in the community outside of just being in Nashville. So those are kind of the three big ideas that were floated: Tennessee Serves Network, disaster, as well as a brief mention of the roadshow. So I want to pause there because I know not everybody was involved in those conversations because we have, now that we've merged the committees, I want to pause there, see if there's questions, ideas, anything we're missing about in terms of key opportunities that we may be able to highlight outside of the normal things like AmeriCorps and the organization as a whole. I'll pause
there. This is Jason. I was not on the comms committee before, but I think the focus on disaster is really meaningful. I think when people are trying to look at like what is a value that is added, I think being an effective part of the response to a disaster like that is meaningful. One thought with Day on the Hill, getting people to show up to Day on the Hill is always kind of a thing, but it might be meaningful. I don't know if members from AmeriCorps programs who might be able to talk about maybe this is like too much stuff, but like, I just think about the value of stories, and how sometimes people get lost in numbers. You know, you see stats, 1,000 of this, 500 of this, whatever. Real easy to, just doesn't have a face, you know? But maybe putting a face to some of these things, because I would be shocked, frankly, if we don't see ourselves in a position, our commission and all commissions in AmeriCorps broadly, looking at pretty significant cuts. I mean, that's just kind of where I'm at with it. I mean, glass half full, glass half empty. I'm just reading the reading the room. It kind of feels like there is no way. I mean, there's no way to meet the spirit of the direction of government right now without a significant reduction. I mean, EPA is looking at like a 60% reduction, right? So like, how do we, best case scenario, find ourselves with support to continue existing? This is like really big picture stuff. I mean, I met yesterday with our Community Action Network people and strategizing around Tim Burchett and just like different members of Congress that may, or, and like the relationship to like local politicians and state politicians with the federal politicians, and just trying to make arguments that kind of connect those two things, because in some ways those significant decisions may be made beyond the state, but that doesn't mean that there's not connectivity between like the local state to the federal decision makers. And I'm just wondering if there's, and maybe that's just not our thing. Maybe that's being handled, by ask and separately. But if there's a way we can amplify whatever initiatives there are to try to create a broad appreciation of the value argument of AmeriCorps. And I know the commission does more than that, but man, an awful lot of that money is attached to AmeriCorps. And if we lost it, there'd be a lot fewer people on any of these Zoom calls. Just I guess all of that to say, is there like a way, and I think like the disaster piece creates a very relevant, like local, regional, state value argument that connects to the big picture thing. I don't know, just some thoughts and observations.
I think that's helpful. Jim, this may be a question for Jim. Thank you, Jason, for sharing that. Have we ever, Jim, as a commission, put forth any, I know obviously Day on the Hill in terms of some of our advocacy work in that space is, to Jason's point, has been primarily targeted towards state officials. Have we ever put forth any sort of a formal coordinated effort towards congressional folks or any of our federal leadership? Do you know?
You mean through the General Assembly or directly to the federal?
Either direct, either I suppose, but I'm even thinking more directly, right? Because I'm thinking about, one thing I think that's unique about Day on the Hill, of course, the idea behind Day on the Hill is physically we're there, physically we're meeting with our elected officials at the state level. And I think definitely, to Jason's point, highlighting and bringing some of those things, however we're able to the awareness at the state level is helpful. But also to Jason's point is, I'm even wondering, outside of Day on the Hill, in the coming months or even, into the summer perhaps, is there a way for us to do some more direct outreach or advocacy directly to our representatives and senators at the federal level? I mean, have we ever done that? Have we ever done congressional meetings, for example, like in district with a member of Congress or with a state senator? Have we ever done that as the commission?
So not in a extremely coordinated way. I mean, the commission has done lots of things in the past to reach out to the members of the Tennessee delegation. We've done at commission meetings where commissioners do little thank you notes that we then send to the delegation. In the past, there have been various times when the chair has reached out to the commissioners and encouraged them to do outreach on specific issues related to what's going on at the federal level. No, of course, staff can't lobby and staff can't encourage other people to lobby. So anything like that would have to come from a commissioner if you're asking for a specific thing. I mean, if we're just providing education, staff can certainly help with that. But if we're asking them for something, then that's where that crosses the line of lobbying, and someone else has to make that ask. But that has happened in the past where the chair has reached out to the commissioners and said, you know, there's this specific thing, please reach out to your representatives and to the senators and ask them for whatever it is we needed at the time.
Yeah.
So we've done that.
Are there any limitations to AmeriCorps workers themselves being able to be a part of those conversations?
Yes.
And are they allowed to at all, or completely no?
They are allowed to do legislative education, so they can talk about the service that they do and the impact that it has on the community, and the impact that it has on them personally. They can talk about those things, but they also are specifically prohibited from doing any type of lobbying for or against any kind of legislation or platform or candidate. So they could not say, please give us more, please vote to give us more money, or please give us more money. Now they could talk.
But for them to say, yeah, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, that's okay. I mean, they could talk about the consequences of what would happen if they weren't in their communities doing the service that they're doing, like what would be lost. I mean, they can certainly talk about that kind of thing, but again, they can't ask for specific action, either in terms of, again, voting for or against something, or, you know, asking for more money or whatever, you know.
Yeah, but just to clarify, we as commissioners, perhaps not the ex officio commissioners, but we as commissioners in a broad sense are able to do that. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's true. And
Okay.
and all of us, including staff and including members, can do any kind of political outreach they want on their own time. It just has to be clearly their own time. So the dividing line is you can't do any kind of lobbying on time that's being paid or supported by federal funds or state funds. And
Okay.
Adam has his hand up. So
yeah, I was just, Nathan, you probably already know this, but a nuance to what Jim just said. Since you're a university employee, I would double check some of that. Not double check. I think that same stuff applies to you since it's a state institution. So you would want to make sure that it was clear that it was on your own time there as well.
Yeah, no, and it does an hour, and we get training on that at the university level. And I think what makes it less messy too, right? It's the same thing, right, in regards to Hatch Act and all the things. You know, I can't be out on university time, on university business as a state employee promoting a party or a candidate or a particular piece of legislation. I think what, of course, in this instance makes it even more challenging is, in addition to whether or not it's on your own time, you are advocating for yourself, right? So indirectly as a commissioner, right? Like, this is a program of the commission. This is something. So that was more where my question was at. What I'm curious about, though, is I'm thinking through, like, yesterday, for example, and I know we're way off topic now, but I think this is really good, and I'm glad Jason brought it up, is like yesterday, I was with Senator Blackburn's team most of the day yesterday, right? And I have, I have a relationship with them. I have a relationship with my elected official. And as an example, as a commissioner, it's like the ability to be thoughtful on how do we, and again, staff can encourage, staff can't X, Y, and Z. So I hear you, Jim, in that regard. But how do we prepare, perhaps is the better word, prepare or educate commissioners enough to where, should they want to go and do that on their own time, they have the information that they would need to be able to have that conversation, right? So for me, as a commissioner, even on my own time outside of work, outside of commission, if I just wanted to sit down with, staff from Senator Blackburn's office and say, hey, I want to bring to your attention some concerns that I have. Again, this says, ask Nathan. I know, here's all the programs that I know are in your district, that are in the state, that I think are at risk, that I'm really worried about. Here's how I think they're going to impact them. And as a commissioner, I just really want to make you aware of this and make you aware that I'm really concerned. Like, that would be appropriate as a commissioner, but not as staff or as an AmeriCorps worker. Is that correct?
Well, again, it depends on whether or not you're asking for something. I mean, if you're just expressing concern about potential cuts and what would happen as a result of those cuts, and you're not asking specifically for anything, it would probably be okay. I mean, that's something that probably comes a little bit close to the line that might be uncomfortable for some folks. But if you're providing education, again, about what the individual member does or what an AmeriCorps program does, what programs in the district do, those kinds of things, that kind of just telling them what happens and what would be lost if those programs went away kind of falls under the legislative education branch as opposed to the lobbying branch. It's when you start asking them to, like, please save us, or please don't cut us, or please give us money, or, you know, those kinds of things where you're asking them to do something. That's where you start getting into the lobbying part. So in terms of so in terms of this kind of support that staff, Volunteer Tennessee staff, can provide, I mean, we can provide you with any kind of educational materials you need in terms of what's happening in specific districts, the number of programs, the number of members, the type of program activities, the sites within those districts. All of that stuff we can provide with no problem. America's Service Commissions has a political action branch called States for Service. They can provide specific information about the kind of asks with a ASK, not ASC, the types of things that you might want to ask in terms of, like, what are the budget proposals look like? What is the national service field want to have happen in the upcoming appropriations? All of that kind of stuff could be provided through States of Service. So, I mean, and, you know, I can connect you or anybody else with the folks at States for Service in terms of getting that kind of information about what the national requests are in that regard. Because there's America's Service Commissions, there's also Voices for National Service. There's a nationwide association of Senior Corps programs. So there are quite a few national entities that are engaged in national service and are very well versed in what would be ideal to have happen in the national service field in terms of funding, appropriations, all that kind of stuff.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. That's helpful. That was just me trying to get some awareness on, because I think Jason's comments, I think, are very valid. So I'll get us back on track then, Daniel. I apologize. Sure. That was me taking us down a rabbit hole.
Yeah, that's okay.
Now my mind's wandering in other spaces, but
yeah, no, I mean, it's a valid concern because as things are getting evaluated, the most recent version of the House markup essentially, it zeroed out funding for state service commissions. It zeroed out quite a bunch of other lines within the AmeriCorps agency budget. It left a little bit of money here and there, but it essentially would wind down the agency. So, I mean, it is certainly something that the commission should be concerned about in terms of the national atmosphere.
Very good. Very good. Okay. So thank you, Jim. So getting us back on track a little bit. So Jason, yes. Thank you. That sounds great. I know. So I think on that list of all the things I said, thank you for that reminder of, in addition to the whatever maybe we can do offline and we can continue to have those conversations and in regards to the federal stuff, is how do we bring the stories and the faces and the voices more directly into Day on the Hill? I think ultimately was the point that, if I'm correct, Jason, you were trying to make sure we were highlighting those stories and the AmeriCorps components thoughtfully.
Yeah, I think putting faces to it is good. I think as commissioners or even like program directors, it's easy to just discount that as like, well, that's where you get your paycheck from, or you're like directly invested in it. And yeah, members are also directly invested in it, but they're like the ones in the field doing the activities, and they can talk about their post. One of the critiques last December was that AmeriCorps doesn't have like really good sense of the return on investment from like the workforce development standpoint, which is something they've started working on, but that was identified as a material weakness. So having it's not the same as having exhaustive statistics for decades, but being able to hear from some members that have had meaningful impacts, or gosh, even alums of some programs that can be like, yeah, and this is what I'm doing now, and this is how I got started, and just to see kind of like the building effect that AmeriCorps service has, both for the communities and the people that they serve.
And Jim, I know we've got some like AmeriCorps. Do we have actual AmeriCorps members that will be participating down the hill so far, or will it just be? I know we've got some leadership folks that will be at down the hill, or like host agencies. But
yeah, well, we have invited the AmeriCorps programs to attend. I think we gave them until next week to respond to let us know whether or not they were going to actually participate. In the past, there may have been, when we've done Down the Hill in the past, when programs have participated, there maybe have been like a very small number of members who've attended, like 2 or maybe 3, but not very many. And usually there aren't any AmeriCorps members who attend. It for programs and for members, it gets a little bit sticky, because even though we wouldn't be asking them to do lobbying, just out of an abundance of caution to make sure that nobody would question those hours for those members, I think programs have generally not wanted to have their members participate.
okay, that's helpful. Jason, any thoughts in that regard on how we do or accomplish what you just shared in light of what Jim also stated? How do we balance those? As somebody who is directly in that work.
That's the big question. My best idea, honestly, is to have some people out there telling stories. If you can't make Day on the Hill, maybe just having just a really cohesive effort at storytelling. That came up in the community action call the other day about telling the stories of beneficiaries of community action. So it's not, it's not just like you're either a contributor or a taker in society, like hearing the stories behind like people's circumstance that get different types of safety net benefits, and same kind of thing, just like who are the people that are, receiving living allowances and education awards, and what do they do and where do they go with it? And, to Jim's point, I can appreciate one, that program participation is generally meh. Building on that and getting members is probably highly, it would be a challenge, I think, but maybe it's a matter of just, AmeriCorps Week is coming up pretty soon, and maybe it's just, and, Hope, I've seen you reach out trying to get people to engage, and I acknowledge that even our program at times is like sometimes helpful, sometimes not, but just getting cohesive response is challenging. But this moment is really unique in that I feel like people are maybe more anxious about it, less like, oh, well, that's a thing happening up there, it'll work itself out. I think people have enough concerns that maybe they'd be willing to sit down with their members and put together stories, and maybe they're, maybe some broader storytelling would be good. Because one thing that has occurred to me is that Virginia Fox has been a consistent maybe critic of AmeriCorps, and in like last December, her last time as chair on her committee, the last thing her last wish was like, if I could see anything happen, I'd like to see AmeriCorps defunded, right? And with Musk's recent thing in the White House with President Trump, there was like what's being cut, how much money is being saved. I know that same committee re-highlighted the fact that they had found fraud, waste, and abuse with the AmeriCorps agency and the audit agencies. AmeriCorps agency's audit hasn't been clean for something like 8 years, which is like a point of weakness for sure. But that said, like there's narrative that will happen. Like that narrative is out there. And I think it's important that there's some consistent counter narrative. I mean, even if you're a program and you're limited by your ability to advocate, you can still tell stories and present a counter narrative for people to consider. Yeah. That's my best thing.
Terry, you have your hand
And
up.
Hope, you unmuted. Yeah.
Yes, this is taking me back to the conversation, Hope, about that software where we want to capture stories. Where are we in the funding of that? Because if ever there was a time we need that, it's now.
Yeah, I think we had put a pause on it because we didn't think we'd be able to accomplish it before Day on the Hill, and we probably at this point we've got 3 weeks. We probably still couldn't. Having said that, though, I do think, and this can transition us a little bit into I think talking about materials and supplies for Day on the Hill, is I think at a very minimal starting place, Jason, to your point, can we do some really intentional, targeted push even in the next couple of days, or maybe even some really direct asks of some key partners we have across the state of, do you have one really good AmeriCorps person that we could hop on a quick phone call with, do a quick little just virtual interview with? I mean, even if it's just a written story with a photo of that person, right? Like, and we've got a couple of those that we can, I mean, even that at a bare minimum is a starting place. And maybe that's what it takes, though, right? Is me calling one of our AmeriCorps people right here in Johnson City and saying, hey, I have a personal relationship with you. Can you give me somebody who has a good, compelling story that would be willing to hop on a quick 10-minute call so we can just ask some questions? And we write almost like news article style, right? But just a little bit of a high level summary of here's this person, here's their career and ambitions, here's the impact they're making in your community, the community you're representing, right? I mean, that, and maybe that's something some commissioners could even help with, right? But no, I think at a bare minimum, at a starting place, I think we could probably do something like that without requiring significant amount of money necessarily or time. So,
And that would be more impactful than just giving them a list of where the money's going.
Yeah, and Nathan, that was going to be my suggestion. Is that, I mean, we already collect great stories from AmeriCorps programs as part of their progress reporting, but and we could go back and take a look at those and see if anything kind of stands out. But if we could have something that has maybe 2 AmeriCorps member stories, just 4 or 5 sentences, not something too terribly long, and then maybe especially for where you are, Nathan, like maybe 2 community members who got assistance through the volunteers and Tennessee Serves, just that kind of look like really short personal stories that we could have as handouts. And we could ask that the commission members try and familiarize themselves with at least one of those stories well enough to be able to say, well, this member, and you can read it there on the sheet, was an AmeriCorps member and they did this, and this is how it impacted their life and what they plan to do going forward, that kind of thing, so that it's almost like a cliff notes for the commission members to be able to tell a story. They'd have the printed sheet, but just a couple. I mean, just again, maybe 2 member stories, 2 community member stories from disaster related stuff. And Andrea put something in the chat. She said, could we create social media posts and then parentheses stories that will be shared on a schedule during the Day on the Hill?
Yeah. I mean, I think so. Yeah, like you mean like link to them? like link to
Yeah.
them or something like that, where they a QR code or a link or a something.
Yeah, any of the stories that we're going to share from the AmeriCorps, just as we're all doing ours, is already linked online, so people can get it both ways, and then it's just
Mhm.
double. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I like that. Well, on that note, because I know we're 11:30 and I want to honor people's time. I know it's a Friday. Okay, I think this is helpful. So we've got some clear items we want to talk about. One of those items, and thank you, Jason, for bringing up, is in light of what's happening, how can we intentionally try to share beyond just some numbers and statistics, some good, powerful, engaging stories of AmeriCorps members directly, as well as potentially, to Jim's point, some folks that received support and services because of those things and because of those programs, right? So the direct and the indirect, a little bit of both, and just some limited ones, but some ways to engage those. So I think that's helpful. Transitioning into the material. So I know one of the items on the list that we've had numerous discussions about was trying to the best of our ability to scale back some of the papers. And I think to Jason's point, maybe a little bit less information and data and a little bit more digestible, a little bit more user friendly. You know, they don't need to know everything, but they need to know the more impactful, most important things, right? So one of the things I would like to see happen, and this is probably my ask, is to get the Jim, how many, what all, can you just quickly, if you know off the top of your head, what all did we include in the packet from last year? I know there was some district specific information. I know there was some high level Volunteer Tennessee. What else was in that packet? Do you recall?
Yeah, so just the general Volunteer Tennessee leave behind that has some facts and figures about Volunteer Tennessee and the programs, the district specific AmeriCorps program information, and then district specific Governor's Volunteer Stars Awards honorees, if they have any. And then we had some generic information about other programs that Volunteer Tennessee has, because it doesn't make, you know, for example, the Award of Excellence, there's only this year, I think 4 or 5 schools. And so that only is going to impact like a couple of districts. So it didn't make sense to do district specific handouts for that and not tell everybody else about that program. So we just had a single sheet that had a couple different programs on it. I think it was the Tennessee Serves and the Award of Excellence, I think, were on the same sheet. And then so that handout was the same for everybody. And then obviously the district specific AmeriCorps sheet and the district specific Governor's Volunteer Stars Award sheet were specific to that district.
So I think reflecting, thank you, Jim, and I'm impressed you know all of that off the top of your head. So thank you. I'm also going back and just revisiting some of what has been shared a couple of times in some of our previous calls. Is I would love to see how we can get the things we've just talked about and some of the information you just talked about down to just a couple of pages. Even if that, you know, a little bit more user-friendly, not as overwhelming. I know last year for me, even as a commissioner who probably knows more, I would say, about the work than the average elected official, it was a lot of information. I've been in lots of those conversations, and I'm genuinely concerned about it just being too much and whether or not they're going to read it and actually look at it. So trying to think through how do we make that much more digestible, still get the information, right, but make it more user-friendly, much more digestible, and get it down to 2 or 3 pages, as opposed to like a large pack. Yeah, I know some of the other Days on the Hill I've been to Days on the Hill where their leave behind is a single front page back or piece of paper. That's it, right? I've been to Day on the Hill where it's 2 pages max, and I know that was a lot of materials and a lot of information because we're doing a lot of things, but it's probably too much to some extent. So I'm wondering if there's a way to still get that information, but to really scale it back and pare it back. So that's my request. I know, Andrea, you've done some Days on the Hills and some other organizations as well. I don't know if you have some thoughts on, you know, if that might be a good decision, but I definitely want to consider that if the group's good with that, on how we might do that.
I've seen it done both ways. It could be a packet with multiple pieces of paper in it, and really you just leave it as a leave behind, and you just share that general impact and story that you want to share. Or it could be just that simple front and back, which is fine. We had a day on the Hill in February, and we had Brandon Gibson come out, and so it was varying thoughts. Some of the leaders that came in said that they love to see the leave behinds because they may not have time in the meeting to go through everything. Brandon came in and said that she liked hearing impact in the stories, and so like a real like one-on-one person, what happened based on the work that you're doing. So I think it is, we'll have the information, whether it's a one page, and that's fine, but definitely be geared up with those stories because they need to see the face or the need and the cause behind the paperwork, if you will. So it can be done both ways, but I think, having a leave behind, whatever that looks like, is fine. But being able to have the folks in the room that can share what their individual or their story is about what's happening or what is needed.
Okay. Very good. That's
Yeah.
helpful. Jim?
Well, yeah, just one thing I'll say, because I've been doing Day on the Hill now for 25 years with Volunteer Tennessee. One of the things that I see consistently pretty much is they will all gravitate to their district specific information. Like we need to have a leave behind that has generic information about Volunteer Tennessee, but they will put that aside and they will look at the district specific information. And because that's what they're concerned about. Like they don't care if we've got Tennessee Serves in every county, but the one they represent, they don't care about Tennessee Serves. Even if it's got 94 counties, they don't care about it. So that's where they will gravitate. And a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them take that information and will pass it along to their staffers for their staffers to review. I mean, some of them are good. Like I've gone into meetings where it was clear that the General Assembly member had already reviewed us as an agency before we even went into the room. And in the room, while we were talking to them, they were looking at the material and asking questions about specific things on the leave behind because they had questions and they were paying attention to it. So they were actively using the leave behind stuff in the meeting itself. But again, you've got other folks who will just take the leave behind and put it aside, and all they look at is their district specific stuff. So it's, kind of finding that balance between, and the purpose of the leave behind is that it is a leave behind, right? Yeah. So you can put a little bit more information in a leave behind than you would put in a tweet because it's not a tweet, it's a leave behind. So I think it's important to have a leave behind that has enough information in it that will kind of capture the general flavor of what Volunteer Tennessee does. And we can certainly shorten the leave behinds by putting only their district information in there, because typically what we do with the AmeriCorps sheet is we put their district specific information in there with the sites that are in their district. And then after that, we list the other AmeriCorps programs across the state. And so that probably for most of them, adding the other AmeriCorps programs across the state adds at least, a page or maybe 2 pages to that district specific stuff. So we could certainly leave that stuff out and just have the district specific information in the AmeriCorps sheets. And we could, instead of, the leave behind, the primary leave behind already has, or at least the one we've used in the past, already has information about Tennessee Serves, and it has information about the Governor's Volunteer Stars Awards and our conference. So it's got kind of high level information about all of the programs that Volunteer Tennessee does. So we could conceivably not do the sheets for the other programs like the Tennessee Serves and the Award of Excellence, and maybe even the Governor's Volunteer Stars Awards, and just leave that information in the leave behind, and include perhaps some district information in the leave behind.
Okay. Can I, what is the update on, and I should know this, but I don't. What is the update on that one pager leave behind that we had worked on, I think before the holidays? There was like I think there was like a draft that maybe Hope had prepared that was a modified, more updated version. Did we move on that, or what happened with that?
Well, we haven't, because again, it doesn't include all the information about all the programs that Volunteer Tennessee does. And if you're talking about a leave behind that isn't going to discuss everything that we do, it's probably not going to be a successful leave behind for us. I mean, it may communicate some pieces of information about what we do, but it's not going to, again, kind of capture the full flavor of what we do.
Okay. So we're 11:45. Here's where my thoughts probably are, is I would like, if this is good with the other commissioners on the screen, if maybe just via email, we can, I based off of this conversation, even draft up, and thank you, Jim, for what you shared in terms of what really needs to be in there and kind of the priorities in terms of what elected officials want to look at and read. A quick little bullet pointed list of what are the absolute important items that we want included, what need to be in there, what is priority. And then I would love to ask Hope to see if she can work on condensing and maybe coming up with some drafts that we could look at, even if it's just via email that she could share with Jim, she could share with us, that we could look at that perhaps accomplishes some of the things that we're talking about. Maybe highlighting some stories. I think that's a great idea. Is there a way to incorporate it? Here's a quick little photo and a couple little blurbs. Is there a way to embed some of that? Trying to focus in on the programs, as Jim just stated, the high level, what Volunteer Tennessee is, all the things. I do want to make sure that, yes, AmeriCorps is a big part of what we do. We want to highlight those stories. I also want to make sure, to Jim's point, that we're also including, I don't want to leave out GVSA, don't want to leave out conference, don't want to leave out the SERVS network. Again, those are things that, and this is my bias will come out being in Northeast Tennessee, right? In those moments, the SERVS network, the disaster relief work, Dawn, those things were absolutely game changing. And I hate that a lot of times they don't get a lot of attention. I really do hate that, right? Because in that moment, they were absolute game changers. I mean, the number of times I had to pick up the phone and call Don and ask him a random question because I didn't know what this thing in the disaster world meant, or the number of times I had to call Jim and say, Jim, we really need help with this, right? We're not making progress on this. Those are some really, really, really awesome stories. And again, I'm biased, but I think it really brought to my attention about how much we don't talk about them enough and don't highlight them enough. And it's really important, incredible things, right? So it's like we do amazing AmeriCorps work, and then there's all these other programs over here that I don't feel like we always talk about. So figuring out how do we best highlight all of the things and also highlight the AmeriCorps stories, as Jason has said, especially considering they're at risk. So I would love if that is a task that I can work with Hope on, Hope and Candace can work on, some combination of us can work on, to come up with perhaps some draft ideas of what these documents could look like that accomplishes all the things we just discussed, but maybe it is a little bit more refreshed, a little bit more branded, maybe a little less narrative, a little bit more picture-y, a little bit more, visually appealing. If that is okay with the folks on the screen, I can ask Hope to just come up with some drafts, not the end all be all, but some stuff for us to look at and discuss. And we could share via email and say, hey, what are thoughts? Does this accomplish what we wanted? Are we good with that? Terry, Andrea, Jason? Okay, perfect. So Hope you got that. And then we can touch base with Jim and figure out, and I'll touch base with Jim too and figure out for sure, again, what are those key things that absolutely have to be on there, but I think that would be great. Okay, the last things, we got 12 minutes. I'm sorry, I was trying to rush us through that. Candace, I'm going to put you on the spot. I know one of the big things we've talked about is how do we, regardless of how the materials land, in addition to the day on the Hill itself, how do we better prep some commissioners before the day of, whether that be, here's a quick video they can watch, whether that be live thoughts. I know you and Hope perhaps have had a couple of conversations on what this might look like. So you're the expert, so I'm going to throw it to you on some feedback.
So, well, hello, everybody. So I have a couple of thoughts, right? Because I do think that we are time sensitive, and to take the time to prepare videos and then get it out there, it might be a little time sensitive for what we have about 2 or 3 weeks. So I have a couple of suggestions, right? Because I've said before that I think for prepping, we could do videos, we could have a virtual where the people that are coming, we can just sort of get the questions out in like a live session, and we could have printed materials for them, right? So I think just moving forward for me, like we could take this a couple of ways. We could just figure out what the action items are and meet with each specific commissioner before time to go ahead and have that one-on-one to make sure that they're prepared, right? That might be a little more time consuming. But I guess, we could do a video, but what is that video going to be on? Like we could sort of pull it together, we could because we normally, I don't want to say normally, but in the past we've done like the mock trainings that have been where the group has been there before time. So is that better to do beforehand? Like what exactly does that look like? And I think that once I have a view of what the commissioners need to be supported to go forward, then we could figure out the timing, how to get it to them, and what follow-up needs to happen that's beforehand, and then what needs to be reinforced the date of. But I do think that the mock training that is done the day of, I think that's really helpful. So when does that take place? What happens with that? What are the bullet points that we want every commissioner to say, regardless of what elected official they're talking about, right? Like, so what are those things that you guys want in the training? And then I think that I can figure out what's the best way to get it to the commissioner with the abbreviated time span that we have before the 19th.
Thoughts from folks on the screen?
I think Nestor made a comment in the chat talking about observing, which I think kind of speaks towards maybe, I remember the years ago when I first got on this, maybe even before then, and it was like, come today on the Hill. And I was like, I don't know about that. A lot of folks don't do that regularly. And it's, like, I'm going to go to this like political official and I'm going to educate them, but not advocate, depending on your circumstance. And like, just like, sometimes, I mean, I have found doing it really helps going through it. So maybe those practice runs or mock runs, just to get a sense of that. I mean, realistically, those, I mean, what do you have, like 5, maybe 10 minutes, probably like 5 or 6 minutes with a person to just kind of tell them what you got and give them the materials and answer any questions, and then you're done, and then you're on to the next one. So I think just giving people a sense of like, you're not going to be with this person for half an hour. I mean, you're going to have a couple talking points, have the opportunity. It would be helpful to have the opportunity to be a little bit familiar with the talking points, just so that, you're not like looking at the reference material as much, and you're able to just, be like, okay, going into this, I think, all these things can be presented to them, but maybe the thing that I feel most comfortable talking about is maybe these couple things, and so I'll really lead with that, as opposed to like, oh my god, I have to remember the GVSA and the conference and the Tennessee Serves Network and what AmeriCorps program is in. I mean, the more that they have to hold in their head while also managing like the anxiety of trying to effectively communicate with this person, so practice, I think, can help people. And I think also to the point of making a more concise argument that has fewer moving pieces, I think that would reduce some pressure.
I think that's a good point that you bring up, Jason, is we can do all of this prep, but in reality, we do only have that 10 or 15 minute time frame that we have to really capture a conversation, right? And then to add to that, if we're bringing on AmeriCorps members that are telling the AmeriCorps story, then that's going to limit the conversation that commissioners have to communicate. So for me, if I'm going to make this, mock video, I'll have Jim get in his suit, and he can be the elected official, and we could possibly, maybe not, I'm just pointing Jim out because, I never see him in the suit other than other than on GVSA and down the hill. I'm kidding, Jim. But but what does that actual, like, what does that 10 minutes, what does that 5 or 10 minutes look like? So I think that if we are setting not an agenda, but like a soft agenda of what's really going to happen in these meetings, what does that even look like? And I am happy to meet with Andrea as well. I always pick on Andrea. That's why I skipped the gym this time. But what do we actually, because we can talk about the leave behind materials, right? But what are the points that we want to drive in while we're actually in their face, in front of them, and what does that look like? And I think that once I have just like a clear vision of the difference between what's on the leave behinds, what if we do have AmeriCorps members, what commissioners are there, we could really get together like a concise little 5 or 7 minute video that people can review beforehand so that they already have it there. And then, like I said, we can have that one virtual meeting where the commissioners that are going to come. And so we could have that, we could have that interactive time as well.
And
Andrea.
I think I'll just add that we may not have time to do that if we can do it this way potentially. If we know what commissioners are coming and how we're going to group them together, maybe we have 3 or 4 groups of 4 people. Then if we have the materials, we can maybe schedule next week and just say, hey, can y'all jump on a virtual call? Mm-hmm. Let's go through these bullet points. Who wants to take the lead and who wants to talk about, we're going to have 5 minutes for AmeriCorps to give their story, and that gives us another 5-minute balance. Who wants to lead the conversation around what is Volunteer Tennessee? Maybe highlight 3 or 4 of the pieces in the packet, and then leave room for asking any questions and go from there. That might be the best way to do it. And with Nestor's response, being one to just be in a room and be butted up with a group potentially, I think that might be helpful, at least to know who's going to be the lead, who's going to be in a room, and divide the time out that way. And potentially, keep the packet the way we've been doing it, but know that we're only pulling out 3 of those sheets that are relevant to that particular meeting. Maybe that's the way to go.
Yeah, no, just to clarify, there's not really any realistic way we're going to have enough members participate to have a member in every meeting. Yeah. So I would say what's going to have to happen if we want to tell those stories is the stories are going to have to be told by the commissioner who's making the visit. So just to make sure everybody's on the same page, where there's not going to be actual AmeriCorps members in each meeting. What I would recommend is kind of following along what Andrea just said in terms of my recommendation for the training would be to kind of mirror this meeting agenda that Nathan set out at the beginning. Messaging, what are the key points that we're trying to get across? Review the materials, although that's a little bit tricky because it may take us some time to actually develop the materials. I mean, we can maybe do some mock-ups of what we think it might look like, even though it might not be the final version. But here are what the materials look like, and here's where to find the different things on the materials. Here are the things to point out on the materials. And then do like a mock visit where one person plays the role of a commissioner and one person plays the role of one of the General Assembly members, just to kind of run through and just do those 3 things. And I think that's going to be a pretty good way to conduct that virtual training. Andrea, I like your suggestion of just involving the people who are going to go on Day on the Hill. I'll say at this point, I've sent out the meeting invitation and some people have accepted and some people have declined. Some people haven't responded. So I don't have the final RSVP list yet for who's actually going to be there. So it may have to be a more general invitation to folks to attend a training.
Candace, would you envision this being, to that point, do you envision this being we record and share out, or is this literally we're all hopping on a Zoom and doing it?
I think either way would be fine. And to Jim's point, since we don't have that hard RSVP right now, that it may be helpful just to do just to do the Zoom call, record it, and then have it as the standing like
Mhm.
training video for right now, like I said, because we are a little time sensitive. And then for the
Thanks, Andrea.
because it is a little time sensitive, go ahead and get everybody's questions going, have that mock, and and then have that to share out on what that looks like. But either I'm fine and open with either way. But like, as I, just to Jim's point as well, just having the mock materials, I don't know what that looks like, maybe last year's materials, whatever that looks like, has to be, already kind of mocked up before we could actually do it. And, it may work to do it a week out, so it's still fresh on everybody's mind before we actually move into Day on the Hill. So, it just really depends on what you guys think works best for this. And I could hold multiple. I could have one in the morning and one in the afternoon to meet everybody's scheduling. But I think it just depends on what you guys think work best. And if this isn't the best way, then we can train it and tailor it for next year on what works best. And we'll have the rest, the remaining of the year from this time to next year to get it right. But I do think that for the support of you guys, and staff can be there, so that we also can make sure that everybody's role is also understood. And I think that that's also important for the meetings.
Very good. So we are 1 minute from, well, it's noon here. I think it's 11, or will be 11 o'clock there. I think this sounds good. So I think what I'm hearing is it's probably worthwhile at go ahead and looking at maybe a date or some times and going ahead probably and sharing those. And even though we may not have all the materials today, right, but going ahead and getting those on people's calendars for whoever's able to join. And then much
I can
as
work
we have
with Jim.
confirmed,
I can work with Jim on that, on the date and
Perfect.
getting the scheduled time.
I think that would be perfect. And then in the meantime, at that, of course, we can do a quick mock version. We'll share the materials, whatever materials we have at that moment to the best, even if they're a draft or even if it's just a high level overview. And then to your point, we can record it. And if folks aren't able to be on, they can go back and watch it. But again, if it doesn't work, I mean, we tried. It's something, some of the questions last year were, I felt overwhelmed, a lot thrown at me right before I went out to the meeting. Great. We'll try this, see if it helps. If not, we'll try something else next year, right? But it can't hurt. I don't think it can hurt to give people some extra time to ask some questions, some extra time to see materials in advance. So if you'll work on that, and then of course, Hope will be working on perhaps some draft documents. Candace, Jim, you work on some potential dates, and then wherever we're at that moment, we'll just kind of roll with it and do it. And we'll see what commissioners are able to be a part of that. And then if we need to hop on a quick call offline, Candace or with Andrea or whatever, to talk through what that actually looks like in terms of on the video, we can do that if that's helpful. Or if you feel like, now you got it and can run with it, that works too. I'm good with either of those. So, okay. Other needs, other questions? I want to honor everybody's time. We're 1 minute over. Okay. Jim, thank you so much. Candace, Hope, thank you all. All the other commissioners, Terry, thank you so much. We'll touch base from there, and we'll see you all here in a couple of weeks, if not on some Zoom calls. So,
Thanks, everybody.
okay. Thank you, Jim.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Uh-oh.